As most of you probably know, Battlefront 2 has had a major resurgence in popularity recently. Because it's back in the spotlight, I think it's likely we'll be getting a Battlefront 3 within a couple of years. And with that in mind, my friend Dread Tribe and I have decided to make a few videos discussing some things we'd like to see in Battlefront 3. In addition to new things, we'll also include some changes we'd like to see to existing things as well. The way these videos will work is we'll start with each hero or reinforcement's weapons and stats, followed by abilities, then star cards, and skins, and finally emotes. We won't just be talking about new heroes and reinforcement classes, but that's what this video will be about. With that out of the way, let's get to the first part of the video. Also, EA and DICE, feel free to use all these ideas. We think they're pretty good ones.
The first character receiving changes in our ideal versions of Battlefront 3 will be General Grievous. Compared to the other heroes, he will be given, by our accounts, more substantial changes than most, though there are some exceptions. The reason for this is that while Grievous is still represented well, as he currently is in Battlefront 2, we feel he could be represented somewhat better, and our ideas here aim to fix that. To start, his lightsaber damage from both the front and the back is actually reduced drastically, down to 70 and 100 respectively. However, his attacking stamina, to compensate, is increased nearly threefold, with 30 swings being possible without running out of stamina. Additionally, his swing speed is boosted from 1.7 swings per second to 3, making him very poor at trading single hits, as he will get out-damaged by every other lightsaber hero, but making him much better at bearing down on opponents, especially those who aim to simply block him. To go along with this, he is given longer attack chains of 8 hits from his normal standing attacks, and 3 hits from his sprinting attacks. Additionally, they'll have slightly better lunge, as Grievous will need this to keep up with opponents who tend to roll from him. Grievous is also given a new bottom ability, similar in input to Anakin's Retribution, though with very, very different function. This ability is to be called Reconfigure, where Grievous will actually switch the amount of arms he has active when the button is pressed. His default stance will still be with 2 lightsabers, though when pressing the button to activate the ability, he will switch to 4 lightsabers, and pressing it again after it's off cooldown will cause him to switch back to 2. This will change his abilities in various ways, and some abilities will be changed more than others. To start, switching to the 4-armed configuration reduces his movement speed by 1 meter per second, down to 7, tying him with Darth Vader. But in exchange, allows him to attack twice as fast, though also further costing him his attack stamina being dropped down to his initial 12 swings. The 4-armed configuration will actually keep the current versions of all of his abilities, with the 2-armed configuration instead gaining the new functions. To start, Thrust Surge in the 2-armed configuration will only use 2 lightsabers, so as a result, it will have a decreased startup time, as he doesn't take the extra time to pull out 2 more lightsabers and 2 more arms, but will only deal half the damage. He'll also be able to act out of it sooner. However, be aware that when landing Thrust Surge and then following up with an attack in the 2-armed configuration, the damage will actually be less than the Thrust Surge alone would be in the 4-armed configuration. In the 2-armed configuration, Unrelenting Advance is actually changed entirely to a new ability called Cyborg Whirlwind. Grievous will hold his lightsabers out to his sides and spin his body around itself, similar to the clip currently being shown. This has the effect of no longer protecting him from blaster fire aimed at his head or feet, in exchange, preventing lightsabers from damaging him from any direction, as he will block them no matter what. The damage, however, remains the same. Claw Rush of his 3 abilities will actually change the least, changing its animation simply to Grievous crawling on all 4s rather than all 6s, once again similar to the clip shown above. However, Claw Rush itself will also be given 10 damage more than it currently deals between both configurations. This will not really affect his performance against troopers much, as he will still not be one-shotting anyone before using lineup weaklings, which means he will still be reliant on that if he wants to use Claw Rush for that purpose. That's all for the main changes to Grievous. Of course, he will receive some changes to his star cards coming up next, but this is the general overview, and you can skip the star card sections if you don't really care about that. Some people might realize that a lot of these changes make Grievous much more akin to his depiction in Tartakovsky's Clone Wars, but that's for good reason. And while people might not initially consider that to be the best idea, the Battlefront developers have not strayed away from making at least some references here and there. See Dooku recommending Grievous use the Unorthodox, a line directly taken from that special. I feel like the best way to represent Grievous to appease both his own fans as well as fans of the Clone Wars would be to depict him in a way faithful to both, even if the old Tartakovsky Clone Wars is no longer canon. And besides, as Grievous is in Battlefront 2, he's probably even more powerful than he was there anyway. Since Grievous is an already existing hero, and not a new one we've made up some ability ideas for, he won't need a full list of star cards, but 2 of his star cards will be changed, and he'll gain an additional one to go along with not only some of the general changes we'd like to see added to Battlefront 3, but also some changes made to Grievous specifically. To start, Sith trained as it is would simply just be overpowered with the changes we'd like to see made to General Grievous. That 30 extra damage would add up far more quickly with 3 swings per second compared to 1.7, even if the initial damage is much lower. Instead, it will simply be 40% extra attack stamina. Still somewhat useful, but probably not in most people's preferred star card lineups. Additionally, 10 extra damage will be added to the final rank of lineup weaklings, just to give Grievous a slight bump in power level to keep him on par with some of the new heroes that might end up having some crazy abilities. Finally, he'll gain a 10th star card to deal with his bottom ability, which would be a temporary 40% damage reduction immediately after switching configurations. Useful in the middle of a fight with a Jedi to trade hits, or when trying to escape, but not overly centralizing to the point where you have to run it either. That's all for Grievous' star cards. After this, since Grievous is an already existing hero, we won't be doing an emotes section, and you'll just see some new skin ideas. After that, we'll get to the new ones.
Now we're going to move on to our first new hero, which is Mace Windu. Mace Windu has average movement speed and HP for a lightsaber hero at 750, and even average damage at 125. His swing speed is among the fastest, but his attack stamina is somewhat low, with average block stamina as well, though still in the lower end. His left ability is called Force Crush, a force ability that leaves Mace exposed for a brief moment on startup, about as long as Thrust Surge's startup, though Mace can move freely around after the animation for casting the ability. After being caught in the initial animation, the target is lifted in the air. A short time after they reach the peak of their ascent, the target is crushed and takes 150 damage. If the target survives, their defenses are lowered for a brief time, allowing Mace to potentially deal follow-up damage. His right ability is Might of Vapad. After a quick startup animation, Mace lunges forward with a thrust that can't be blocked, dealing moderate damage, probably somewhere around 80 or 100, and staggering them, giving him an assured follow-up hit afterward. Mace's middle ability is Shatterpoint, where he points his blade forward, debuffing up to 5 enemies in range, visible with the broken glass effect like on the clip being shown. This is unique damage debuff, as the affected enemies only receive more damage from Mace, and not his allies. Afflicted targets also deal 40% reduced damage to him, and he will regain some stamina when hitting them. Finally, his bottom ability is Close Quarter Pull, a short-range force pull that can quickly chain into any of Mace's abilities. The range is short, but decently wide enough to catch nearby enemies on either side of him. The pull itself deals minor damage and has somewhat of a long cooldown, but has a quick activation and provides 60% damage reduction. Moving on to Mace Windu's star cards, at number 1 is Master's Resilience, where he gets 150 extra HP. His second star card is called Cyborg Crusher, in which Force Crush does an extra 50 damage. His third star card is called Ceaseless Pressure, in which he gains 35% extra attack stamina. Mace Windu's fourth star card is called Vapad Pierce, in which Might of Vapad does an extra 10 damage to heroes and 30 damage to troops. His fifth star card is called Endless Fractures, allowing him to target 4 more enemies with Shatter Point. His sixth star card is called Weak Point, allowing him to deal 15 extra damage to debuff targets. His seventh star card is called Master of the Order, giving him 15% more damage reduction and 50% more stamina regen on hit with Shatter Point. His eighth star card is called Distant Crush, giving him 40% more targeting range on Crush. His ninth star card is called Bane of the Sith, reducing his cooldown by 15% on Might of Vapad. His last star card is called Light and Dark, causing close quarter pull to deal 25 bonus damage. Next, we'll be covering Mace Windu's emotes and lastly skins.
He's too dangerous to be left alive.
Take a seat. This party's over. The Senate will decide your fate.
What better character to follow Mace Windu with than Jango Fett, the character he killed? Jango would look much like his son Boba, but would have a drastically different playstyle, focusing more on close-range hit-and-run tactics rather than long-range, prolonged flight and harassment. As a result of this need to be close, his movement speed would be slightly higher than Boba's, and his health would be 50 points higher at 650, the average for a blaster hero. Jango's West Star 34 blasters would function similarly to the ARC Trooper's primary fire when it's used in its rapid-fire configuration as opposed to its long-range configuration, but would trade some of the fire rate of the ARC Trooper for damage, with 42 damage per shot, 22 at maximum fall-off range, and 360 rounds per minute. His jetpack would function quite differently from Boba's, as a very fast burst of flight rather than the slower, continuous flight Boba uses. It would have 2 charges, so it would be strictly like an upgrade of the normal jet trooper. Its flight pattern would be dependent upon the direction held by the player, and would be triggered the same as Boba, with the left trigger. Like Boba, he can dodge in midair as well. For Jango's abilities, his right ability would be the flamethrower. Utilizing his wrist-mounted flamethrower, Jango would let loose a spout of short-ranged fire that can be held to continually torch the immediate area. With a range of 8 meters and an approximate damage of 300 per second, this move would be very powerful at melting close-range targets, even going through shielding such as that of the Droideka, but not a lightsaber block. His left ability, the Whipcord, would see Jango wrapping his target up after a brief activation period. This would only last for half a second, dealing 100 damage and usable from up to 14 meters, but it would allow Jango just enough time to let loose a barrage of blaster fire, or perhaps damage from some other abilities. Killing the target with this ability would trigger a unique animation of Jango yanking the target back toward him, though this is only cosmetic and can be moved out of should that put the player in danger. Finally, his middle ability, the Camino Saber Dart, or just Saber Dart. Jango would briefly take aim before firing the wrist-mounted projectile, dealing a massive 250 on impact, though considerably less to heroes at 120, preventing abuse from a combination of the Whipcord and Saber Dart combo, which would be, I imagine, absolutely devastating to even somebody as difficult to kill as Anakin. As a small note, when using his melee attack, he would use the razors seen on his forearms in Attack of the Clones, dealing high damage equal to Boba Fett's own melee. For Jango's star cards, we're starting off with Improved Jetpack, which grants him an additional charge on his jetpack usage, in exchange for a slower recharge time. His second star card is Speed Refuel, which gives him quicker recharge on his jetpack. His third star card is Entanglement, which grants an extra half a second of stun in exchange for a 5-second longer cooldown on his whipcord. His fourth star card is Immolation, which grants 3 meters of range on his flamethrower. His fifth star card is Spare Dart Compartment, which shaves off 5 seconds of cooldown on his Camino Saber Dart. The sixth star card is Just Business, which grants 70% off of his heat buildup after a kill. His seventh star card is Scorched Earth, which grants 40% damage reduction while using his flamethrower. His eighth star card is Jaster's Legacy, which reduces the damage of all of his abilities by 50, but gives him 30% faster cooldown. His ninth star card is Linked Feed Equipment, which causes kills with the whipcord, though notably not kills which the whipcord assisted in, to refund charges of his jetpack. Finally, his last star card is Kaminoan Manufacturing, which grants 50 extra damage to heroes and 100 extra damage to troopers on his Camino Saber Dart.
Well, we won't be seeing him again.
100, 200, 300. You guys are gonna make me rich.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Qui-Gon Jinn debuts as something of a ranged tank. His run speed is quite low at 7 meters per second, but he has high HP at 800, though in addition his lightsaber damage is only 120 from the front and 150 from behind. Beyond that, his swinging speed is only average, and with his default attack stamina being only average as well, with poor block stamina. What he lacks in lightsaber capabilities, he makes up for in his proficiency with the Force. Starting off with his left ability, Guided Pull is a 2-part ability. Upon its activation, Qui-Gon will not enter any new animation, but will utter one of a few voice lines audible only to himself and allies, and at the same time, the edges of the screen will darken, while a targeting ring of green light will appear in front of him a few meters out. He's free to continue any other actions such as blocking at this time. The ring is visible only to himself and allies while he is controlling it, during which Qui-Gon can move the ring up to 15 meters in front of him, as well as side to side and even at higher ground, though not directly above him or behind him. When re-triggering the ability, Qui-Gon will cease any actions he is currently taking. The ability cannot be used in the air, and attempting to use it will cause Qui-Gon to simply cast the ability as soon as he hits the ground. He will then gain 30% damage reduction, and the ring will then be visible to enemies for about a third of a second before it explodes into light being pulled toward Qui-Gon. Anyone still in the ring as it explodes will be pulled toward him, unless they are blocking or otherwise immune to crowd controls. Additionally, if the player quickly double taps the button for this ability, Qui-Gon will immediately cast the ring in front of him, though this would be decidedly less useful. His right ability is Living Force, which upon activating will have him place his left hand to his chest and reach out, as if reaching out to the Force, with his right, as he takes a deep breath. After, Qui-Gon will have a global scan of all enemies on the map, but only for 5 seconds. The main use of this ability would be to allow Qui-Gon to avoid troublesome situations, such as large detachments of enemies moving toward a position he may have otherwise wanted to move toward, or to allow a more brave Qui-Gon player to approach those very same dangerous situations. Qui-Gon's middle ability is Serenity, which sees him enter a meditative stance like that seen in his fight with Darth Maul, boosting his lightsaber damage by 80 and causing lightsaber enemies who block his attacks to lose more block stamina for up to 8 seconds. His bottom ability is Stance Change, causing him to switch from the more aggressive Ataru stance to the more defensive Makashi stance, inverting his attack and block stamina. This can be done at any time except while casting abilities, and has no animation. It is even possible between swings or while blocking, though it does include a voice line audible to enemies. It also changes his abilities around. His left ability becomes Guided Push, which works primarily the same as the pull in terms of activation, though the targeting ring is now blue. This difference in color is primarily to alert allies as to which ability Qui-Gon will use. The main change, obviously, being that Qui-Gon will now push targets that are inside the ring a great distance away from him instead of pulling them. It also slightly changes the animation. His middle ability changes as well, now being Stifling Mind Trick instead of Serenity. Qui-Gon will wave his hand in front of him, and any targeted enemies will be unable to jump, including by way of jetpack, and will only be given one dodge until the effect ends. Moving on to Qui-Gon Jinn's star cards, we start with his extra health star card, Padded Tunic, which grants him 150 extra HP. His second star card is Balanced Stances, which grants him 20% extra stamina for attacking while he's in his more offensive form, and 20% extra stamina for defending while he's in his more defensive form. His third star card is Strength of the Force, which grants 40 extra damage on both his pull and his push in Guided Pull and Guided Push. His fourth star card is Will of the Force, which reduces the cooldown of both of his middle abilities by 8 seconds. His fifth star card is Protective Guide, which grants all allies around the map 30% damage reduction while the Living Force is active. His sixth star card is The Living Force, which grants 5% cooldown reduction on all of his abilities for every 10% health missing. His seventh star card is Wise Master, which grants an additional 5 meters of distance on the ring of his Guided Pull and Guided Push. His eighth star card is Jedi Influence, which grants 2 seconds of active time to both of his middle abilities. The ninth star card is Faith in the Force, which reduces the active time of Living Force by 3 seconds, but grants it an extra charge. His 10th and final star card is Exhaustive Form, which grants his next attack immediately after switching stances 30 extra damage, but causes the cooldown time of his stance switch to be 10 seconds instead of 3.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. There's always a bigger fish.
Whenever you gamble, my friend, eventually you lose.
Savage Opress distances himself from his brother by functioning as more of a tank who attacks and defends in equal measure. With 800 HP, average run speed, slow swing speed, above average attack and block stamina eclipsing his brother's stamina on both ends, and 135 damage a swing from the front and 180 from behind. Additionally, while he uses his double-bladed lightsaber, he only uses one blade, with only the second being activated only during some abilities. Savage's left ability is Overrun, an unblockable swing during which Savage activates the second blade of his lightsaber and twirls it while moving forward. The ability is unblockable and deals 100 damage to troopers and 70 to heroes. Savage's right ability is Devastate. Upon activating, Savage will twirl his lightsaber and impale the earth beneath him, causing glowing red cracks to appear, indicating the area of effect. He also has 60% damage reduction. Enemies caught in the ability will be immobilized very briefly and take massive damage, 140, and will receive a debilitating effect similar to Rey's Mind Trick for half a second after the move ends, primarily to protect Savage from retaliation. Savage's middle ability is Atrocity. Upon the activation, Savage will run his thumb across his throat, signaling death for the enemy, and becomes enveloped by a reddish aura. The ability otherwise does nothing until Savage gets a kill. When this happens, all of the fallen target's allies within a 7-meter radius will have their gaze forced in the general direction of Savage. They will still be able to move the reticles somewhat and move normally, but they will be forced to have him in their gaze for the next 5 seconds as the effect lasts. His bottom ability is Unflinching. Activating this ability causes Savage to become immune to any sort of crowd control or knockdown effects and grants 50% damage reduction for 10 seconds. Not the most flashy ability, but one that gets the job done. Next up, we're going to move on to Savage's star cards. His first star card is called Nightbrother Resilience, and it gives him 100 extra health regeneration. His next star card is called Ceaseless Slaughter. in which he gains 1 point of damage dealt and 0.5 damage reduction upon each trooper kill, or 200 damage dealt to enemy heroes up to a maximum of 20 damage and 10% damage reduction. His next star card is called Brutality. Overrun does 50 extra damage to troops and 30 extra to heroes. Savage's 4th star card is called Oppressor, giving him an extra charge on Devastate at the cost of having 10% slower cooldown. His 5th star card is called Wicked Deeds, granting 5 extra meters on the effect caused by Atrocity. His 6th star card is called Savagery, and it causes him to deal 25 extra damage to targets who have lost at least 10% of their HP. Up next we have Dishonorable Strike, and it has the effect of dealing 50 bonus damage to targets hit from behind with Overrun. Up next we have Cycle of Vengeance. Kills with Devastate speed up all ability cooldown by 10% per kill. His 9th star card is called Dathomir Darkness, and it grants 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds after landing on Atrocity. His last star card is called Untouchable, and this causes abilities that hit Savage to have 10 seconds added to their cooldown. Next, we're going to show you his emotes and his skins. Alright guys, that's going to be the end of our first Battlefront 3 video. We'll be making a lot more of them soon, so leave a like and subscribe if you want to see that kind of content. See you next time.